How I got out of a rut. What I want to share with you today as part of Movember. If you're not seeing the video, you're missing out on a beautiful stash that is slowly starting to get a little bit irritating, I must say, but has been kind of fun. Been doing it for the last couple of years as part of men's mental health, and it's a really nice way to start a conversation a bit of a different way around how I feel like I stand for mental health a little bit differently than most, and hopefully, at least for me, have found ways for certain strategies and certain conversations to be a lot more helpful towards my own personal mental health, as well as being able to help hundreds, if not thousands, of men and women in a spot where they're noticing they're in a bit of a mental or physical rut, right? And they just don't feel like they have momentum. So, what I want to share with you today is just insight into how I feel like I've got more momentum with both my work, my passions, my exercise than I have really ultimately in the last maybe even 4.5 years at this point. So, the reason I share this with you is what's worked for me. If it doesn't work for you, then find something else. But really, that addressing that space of what I feel I have control over. I think when you come back to feeling levels of anxiety, levels of low mood, there can be a level of lack of control or a lack of momentum that can really get in the way. And for me, I had a real big disruption, I guess, in my overall trajectory in life. And if anyone's followed me for any level of time, you know I had a pretty major motorbike crash. That's why I have the motorbike helmet in the background to remind me of the dumb things I did, and also how lucky I was to a degree to still be here and being able to address the adaptability of humans in regards to changing course, but also the challenges around how I deal with stuff now compared to then. And I think in the ways that I try to find a silver lining, I think one of the big ones here is that I see the world in a very different way, and I can resonate with so many more people than I could back then, because I simply now have to manage emotions and stresses in a different way. For me, like many people, or at least now I've discovered like many people, managing emotions became a way of blocking things out, using some form of just getting away from them as that strategy. And for me, that was through exercise, right? I'm feeling a certain way, I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling angry, I'm feeling frustrated, exercise. And whether that's alcohol, drugs, or exercise, I think those are fairly the top three for a lot of people. I feel like they're in a spot where that can manage things to a point. When going through this motorbike crash and being physically not nearly as capable as I was before, and not really having that outlet from an exercise standpoint, that became a really quite big rediscovery for me in a lot of ways around how I had to manage emotions and really sit with them in a lot of different ways to really start to look at other ways of coping with life, right? And I think if you've been in the spot where you've been in a rut before, where you feel like stress is getting to you more, you just don't feel like you've got momentum, or there's a level of frustration or just consistently low mood that's coming up and it's really starting to get in the way. So the reason I share this is I think it's multifaceted, like all things. It's not just, start exercising and everything feels better again. It's really this awareness of how do we then get momentum back. If you're reading this or listening to this in a space where you currently have momentum, then amazing. This might be a nice way to address how can you protect that momentum and keep it going for as long as possible. Whereas if you're in a spot where you just don't feel like you can really catch on, you feel like you're constantly fighting life and obstacles or just busyness that is getting in the way of you really feeling like you've got traction. Hopefully this helps too. So where I want to start really is this awareness of a general lull in mood and motivation is kind of a signal in itself, but I think a lot of time it can be something that we start to feel like something's wrong with us, right? Like a low mood, like feeling sad, feeling out of sorts is something that we need to start blocking out, and we need to start feeling happy. And I think from a lot of my mentors as well, I think this awareness of if you label sad as bad, you typically are sad more often. And it's this space where understanding that if you have the highs, you need to have the lows, because if you're happy all the time, well, that's just normal. So it's no longer a peak, it's just normal, right? So I think it's this awareness of, regardless of where you are right now, there's a space of if your life improves or your life gets worse, your body will still tend to consolidate and stabilize at any level, right? So if you have all these magical things happen in your life, you go on holiday, you can have some really, really big peaks. But I don't know about you, I've found in myself that the whole holiday does not just become this big magical thing all the time, right? You have these travel experiences or lulls in between the peaks, and you feel like, why am I sad on holiday, or why am I not feeling amazing on holiday? I should be happy now, right? And I think it's this sort of forced nature that we should always feel that way. Whereas if maybe we've had promotion at work, we've won a certain event or whatever the thing might be, we do the thing, we feel great, and then we lull a little bit afterwards, right? The classic sort of competition blues. And we sort of constantly feel like we're chasing these peaks, and they can be followed by valleys, and the valleys start to continue because we associate them with being bad. At least that's what's happened for me. And I think hopefully if that feels normal for you, if that's something that's come up for you, it's a nice space to just remind yourself that it's part of the human experience. You can't have the highs without the lows, and really start to explore what those mean. That became phase number one for me, right? Is if I wasn't just able to out exercise all my problems, what were my new coping strategies around looking and exploring what this is? And I guess coping strategies became less about coping and more about feeling. It became more about, rather than attaching labels and the shame and guilt of certain emotions we feel, it became a space to really sit with a realization that I started to make it a lot worse myself by trying to make it something that it wasn't, right? If that makes sense. The second part to this, I think, was this ability to be very mindful around what days in my week I felt genuinely pretty good and what days I felt pretty low. And this is something I don't know how many people resonate with, but for me, I felt pretty good through the week. I love what I do. I love helping people. And I'm definitely one of these. I've actually noticed I'm a bit more of a people pleaser than I thought, but I'm in a space where I really genuinely feel better when I'm helping other people, right? Which meant that Monday to Friday, I was usually pretty good. Even if I didn't do everything quite right for myself, I was certainly in a spot where I really fed off the energy I had from people in my world. Through clients I was working with, the team I was alongside, all of those things. And I still am. I'm very much in that space. But alongside that, what I found is that my Sundays, if I just looked at the average of how my days and how my moods were on those days, Sunday was the lowest. And part of that was okay, well, clearly you weren't helping as many people on that day. But as you all know, there needs to be a bit of a balance between, charging forward and recharging and taking that time to consolidate and balance. So I had to really explore that space, because clearly it wasn't just going to be, well, dive into coaching more, do more stuff, and just work 7 days a week, because I'd done that for at least 3 or 4 years. No, probably 8, quite a while, certainly in the personal training space, and then certainly online as well. It's a huge part of what I do, and it's clearly why I'm in the industry. But realizing that the day that I felt lowest was Sunday was something I'd really had to explore for a while. And certainly coming off the back of feeling physically a lot less capable, having those injuries post-crash and having to go through multiple surgeries and ultimately still working through a lack of shoulder function, there was a real mismatch of who I thought I was, how I was acting on a day-to-day basis, and the mood that continued to follow that was much lower than I really wanted it to be. So where I'm getting to here, team, is this ability to get to a place where I had to identify that, one, helping people was a big part of my, if you want to use the word purpose, but the space of feeling a level of satisfaction in my day. And I think my first lesson here is, if you feel that you're in a rut, help someone, right? If you feel that there is low mood, you're noticing that there's all this stuff going on. Why is this wrong? Why do I feel so low? Why do I feel sad all the time? Help someone. And for me, that's been very helpful to get to a place where, when I feel hesitant to say useful, but if I feel in a spot where I know I'm genuinely having an impact on someone else's life, that in itself is just as selfless as it is selfish, because it's something that makes me feel good as well. And I think potentially you've found this in yourself, but I think it's a nice reminder that if you are in a bit of a lull, 9 times out of 10 for myself, I've found that when I've had a low mood and when I'm consistently having a low mood, I'm continually thinking about myself. I'm thinking about, why am I having a low mood? Why is my day not going the way I want it to? Why am I not doing X, Y, and Z to the degree I'd like? It's all very inward, right? Why am I not this way? Whereas if there's an external, like, how can I help other people? How can I just get out there and feel like I'm in a spot where I'm feeling like there's an impact I'm having on the people around me? I think it's a really interesting spot for me. I think you can go too far. And I think certainly in the health space, we're in the middle of hiring and things right now for new health coach roles. And it's been a really interesting space to be reminded of how short the average lifespan of a health coach is, because most health coaches get a real buzz of helping other people. I think it's an amazing thing to feel. But an inability to be able to recharge, step back, and be able to enjoy your own space, your own time, your own thoughts, or simply just be able to relax and switch off, really shortens the lifespan of a lot of health coaches, because they can do it for a couple of years and then they fizzle out. They have no energy, no motivation left to help other people, and they don't stay in the industry. The last time I checked, it was like 14 to 16 months is the average lifespan of a health coach, which across industries is super low, right? So I noticed myself going to that spot, and I wanted to know that not the only thing that kept me going and felt a level of enjoyment and satisfaction internally was simply helping others. The second part that I found that was really helpful, and that I knew from previous years, certainly when I was more physically, I don't want to say physically capable, but certainly felt like I was a bit more at my peak, was doing hard things, right? And I think this is something that for me is a belief that it's part of human nature to feel like you're progressing, feeling like you're improving in some way, and have a little insight, I guess, onto what this looks like for you, right? I think potentially your happiest years weren't the ones where you were sipping margaritas on the beachfront, or whatever you sip on the beachfront. It was the years where you felt like there was real meaning, real purpose. Maybe it was a level of connection in a certain relationships where you really feel like you were working on something together. It may have been that whole family space where you and your partner were in a space where you were raising that family together, and there were a lot of hard times that you're working through, right? Those nights, those all the things that come with that. Or it might have been certain pursuits, both in career, sporting events, or otherwise, where you felt like you were really making an impact. You were really seeing progress in what you were doing. And that's something that I guess I reflected a lot on to get to a point where what's something I could do meaningful, right? I don't have an Ironman around the corner, but what can I do that really feels meaningful? And just a side tangent on that, I found that it can go to two extremes. If you have no goals and you're being consistent, well, you're building a muscle that's obviously very admirable in itself. Most people aren't consistent, but you can feel like you're only really putting in 70%, 80% because there's no vision. There's nothing really pulling you moving forward. So certainly in our world with a lot of our clients, it's something we're really going to be developing a lot more into 2025 is the ability to really feel like, what are you pulling towards? Because when you're pursuing something, there's really just more intensity, more focus in what you're doing. Yet if you're at the other extreme where you're only motivated when you've got an Ironman or a coast to coast or an ultra marathon around the corner, you can go through massive peaks and valleys around that space where you're only motivated by an event, if not rather the worry and fear that you won't be ready by the event. And that's, if you dig into it, you'll see a lot of people that are only motivated because they don't want to be shit on the day, right? I've booked in this event, I must train, otherwise I'm not going to be ready. Once the event's out the way, you fizzle and burn for 6 months until you find the next event, right? And you go very much up and down a lot. And I've seen that a ton. So it's either one, it's not one or the other, right? No vision or one singular vision. I think it's this overall all-encompassing space. And if you listen to our podcast, our YouTube trainings, or any of our content really in the last 4, 5, 6 years, there's been a really strong focus towards this optimizing for 80, or a space where you're really strong and capable and as feeling that level of vitality that you can really enjoy every day without your body holding you back. Now, that's a really amazing vision. I think, that's something that I really highlight or really want to reinforce that you think about, and that you really have a level of emotional attachment to, like, that's something I really feel like I could aim towards. Yet at the same time, it's so far away that why does it make a difference now? So having the balance of both short and long-term goals is obviously nothing that's radically new. But what does that look like in the space of, if you're in your 40s and 50s, you're no longer, or potentially have never been, particularly big in like very competitive sports? Maybe that's been either a past life or you've never been competitive before, and it's a whole rediscovery of who you are. Either way, you're amazing. The big step here is, how can you create some benchmarks and checkpoints along the way to really guarantee that when you get to 80 plus, you're in a spot that you're still capable, you're still walking, you're still able to do things by yourself, you're independent. And what we've seen is to have a balance of both three sort of key categories: endurance, strength, and fitness. So some examples of what these might look like is, strength could be something like a pull-up or a deadlift, something where there's kind of a body weight element as well as a power element involved, right? The best way to improve your pull-ups is, if you get lighter, it's easy to do a pull-up. In the same way that if you do a percentage of weight or body weight deadlift, if you're 90 kilos, you've got to lift 90 kilos. If you're 60 kilos, you've got to lift 60 kilos, right? It's sort of a nice benchmark to work to in regards to a sort of power to weight ratio type of strength. The second part here is fitness, and I really like the more short to medium distance things that are also very low impact, right? The only problem with something like running is it's a great way to keep aerobically fit, but for the large majority of the population, your knees, ankles, hips start to disagree with you before you get to 80 at least. So looking at something potentially like a rowing machine can be helpful in regards to much less impact, but still kind of tough on the lower back. A bike sprint in some form, or a stationary bike, can be an amazing tool, and probably potentially the best of the three in regards to the suggestions, where it's purely aerobic capacity. It's the clearance of lactic acid and the ability to create a level of stamina and really just improvement of oxygen utilization that we can keep yourself as fit as possible. And when we look at the key metrics of longevity, obviously the ability to stay fit and really use oxygen well is going to be a huge part of that, right? If you're puffing up the stairs at 30, then you're not going to be feeling so great at 70. And then the last one is strength endurance, which is kind of a nice combo between the two, right? This is where we can look into things like a wall sit or a plank. I quite like the space where it's more of a static hold in a way, and it just allows you to make sure that there's an ability to hold things for a long period of time. So those are my three as a benchmark, something like a deadlift pull-up, something like a wall sit plank, and something like a spin bike or rowing machine. Those become short-term benchmarks. So having a balance between benchmarks and also that long-term vision, I think are two key aspects of moving away from it being something that can either be a lack of vision or very inconsistent up and down, and just becoming more meaningful towards the things that you can control on a monthly basis. Now, I couldn't finish this section, I guess, without talking about how do we associate with those benchmarks, because I think there's a societal kind of, I guess there's a separation now happening, really happening between people that would see themselves as struggling to stay healthy and people that feel like they're fit, they're athletic, they associate themselves with being fit. And I think fundamentally the difference between the two is that they like doing hard things, right? And if you want to improve momentum, you want to feel like there's a level of strength and vitality and just drive with your week and you feel like your body's along for the ride, I think doing hard things is something that you really have to think about how you associate those things with. So if I've scheduled a leg session for my Thursday morning, right? Am I sort of squeaming throughout the week, being like, oh, I really don't want to do that session. Oh, golly, I'm going to have an extra coffee this morning or an extra pre-workout to get through that workout today. I'm just putting in extra unnecessary suffering on myself versus, oh, I'm really looking forward to like pushing my body today. I'm really looking forward to seeing like, what can I get on that squat or on that leg press today? To really kind of lean into it. Now, there's a lot of stuff that we've talked about in the past around you can actually get more benefits out of things when you enjoy the activity, right? Because if you stress yourself out, you are fundamentally creating it as more of a stressful activity than a healthy activity. The study I've referred to in the past is they put two hamsters on a wheel. One was able to run when it wanted to, and the other one was forced to run when the first one did. And what they noticed and through the test they did is that one got all the benefits of exercising, right? Because they actually was something that they felt in control of. There was a level of self-agency where they got healthier because they were exercising. Yet the second, I was going to say chipmunk, but hamster, was in a spot where it was forced to exercise, right? So it has to exercise. And all that happened was that it didn't get the health benefits, but it got the stress implications, right? Forced to do things it didn't want to. So that in itself really teaches you, even if you're begrudgingly doing the activities, right? You're doing the classes, you're eating the healthy foods, you're doing this stuff because you think you have to. Well, you're leaving 80% of the results on the table at minimum, right? So my awareness of this continued to develop, I guess, through many different hard things I've done in the past, the triathlons, the rowing, the rugby, the bodybuilding. But having to do that in a space where, and this maybe is more real for you, is if you're in your mid-40s, 50s, even mid-30s, where you've had either a significant injury or you're getting back into it after a long time of not being at your peak health. It's very obvious to see that you're not as fit as you once were. You're not as strong. You're not as capable. There's a gap, right? And it can be really, really easy to beat yourself up about this gap. It can be really a case of like, why am I not, well, it could go as far as why am I not good enough, but I think that's unhelpful. It could be less about just being demotivated that there's progress, massive progress that needs to be made overnight, seemingly, or just a gap between you've digressed. So where I've seen that to be helpful is two-part. One is as you make progress, actually, no, it's one part. The one thing I would like you to focus on, and Mandy's really big on this too, one of our clinical nutritionists and overall head coach, is the ability to look at the gain, not the gap, right? I.e., what that means is rather than the gap of how far you've got to go to get back to that peak, even if you're 50 now and you were 20 then and it's maybe not the same goal, focus on the gain. And what I noticed with, give you a simple example. There was a particular lift, so bicep curl, for example, that I could lift, say, 22 kilos in a particular sort of isolated bicep curl motion. After this injury, I was lifting a drink bottle and struggling, all right, 500 grams. That's a pretty big gap. But just think about progress with training for a second. And this is how I really found myself to enjoy it and actually get back into the consistency quite quickly, was if I'm already at, quote unquote peak health and I'm lifting an 18 kilo dumbbell, it might take me 6 months to get to 19 kilos or 20 kilos, right? It takes a really, really long time if you've been training for a long time to be able to progress in a lift. Yet the benefit of starting with 500 grams as being the max I could lift is the next week I did 1 kilo and then 2 kilo and then 3 and then 4, right? And then within like 2 months, I was already back to 6 to 8 kilos. That's really fun, right? You're progressing so much quicker than you have since you started lifting. And provided you allow yourself to experience the progress you are making from the starting point that you now have, as opposed to the gap of where you once were, which would just be robbing yourself of all the joy of actually progressing once again. Honestly, I was pleasantly surprised with myself being able to stay in that mindset. But in hindsight, I stopped so much personal suffering for myself through the journey of rebuilding some level of strength. And right now, I'm still being mindful of that because over time it does start to slow down again, and I'm still not where I once was in regards to capability of strength and stability, certainly of the shoulder. But the gain, I've made reminds me of the progress and really that pat on the back and confidence of like continuing to stick with it, as opposed to how much further I've got to go, which just feels demotivating, to be honest. Right. So I've gone through a lot here, and hopefully some of this is helpful, but the ability to address if you are stuck in a rut, it's never just physical or it's never just mental. So if you're stuck in thinking it's mental, there's two things I want you to highlight here. One, how can I be helpful to other people? Because if I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling of really low mood for a consistent or extended amount of time, how can I help others? I think it's being very helpful, right? There's a space where if you're stuck in a spot of just focusing on yourself, then I think the mood is typically lower. If life gets too easy, if everything's about me, my mood is lower. If I add challenge into my life, if I have something I'm pursuing and focusing on, improving and seeing a level of confidence build with the actions I continually do, I feel better. And if I'm continuing to help other people also improve in some capacity, or support them in some way, or provide for them in some way, or simply coach them through certain things, or just be there, that also feels really helpful for me. That feels like I'm getting something out of that too, and I feel better. So for me personally, those are two things that for me right now, I feel like I'm in a better spot than I have in the last 4.5 years. As I continue to rebuild, I am by no means healed, either mentally or physically. I very much still have those low days, but it's been a nice space that allows me to address what that internal chatter looks like. And I think a lot of us can feel like we're going crazy if we're continuing to repeat the same stories, the same problems over and over again. Yet those two, I guess, key actions for me or key focus points have been very helpful in regards to building that back up. And over time has been something that being a cornerstone. If I feel like, hey, why is this week I'm just a little bit lower in energy, right? It could be as simple, I just haven't eaten or slept well enough. But if those things are ticked off, then how can I help someone this week? How can I do something hard this week? Am I noticing I'm lacking a bit of focus in my training? Do you feel like I'm been doing the same thing for a little while? How am I looking at feeding my brain? What am I listening to, right? There's going to be a pretty big difference between constantly listening to negativity and complaining and gossip and all sorts of things that I very much actively avoid compared to things that feel like I'm developing the brain, the body, or just actually in some cases unplugging and letting my brain just work its way through whatever's happening or listening to or smelling the roses in a way. So again, without as much of a goal and an education point of most episodes, hopefully it's something that you can really lean into, because when you're looking to improve your health, I'll say it again, obviously mental and physical cannot be separated. And if you're just trying to improve the physical without addressing the mental, or otherwise, you're trying to improve the mental without the physical, you're leaving a lot on the table, and I think you could get a lot more out of it. And that's exactly what these are for. This is my version of feeling helpful for people that are listening all over the world. And every time I get comments from you guys, I get insight into how it's helped you in some way or made you think of things differently. That's a benefit for you, but it's also a benefit for me, because being able to talk through this and be able to get to a point of being able to verbalize it obviously requires a fair amount of time of thinking over things as well. So thank you to you as much as hopefully you find this helpful from me. And I hope you have an amazing week, finishing off Movember in style with a dirty stash, and hopefully you appreciate it until next time. So hope you have an amazing week. We'll talk again next time. Bye.